The darkness of World War II was not only found on the battlefields of Europe, the Pacific, and North Africa, but also in hidden offices, secret bunkers, and the shadowed corridors of intelligence agencies where decisions were made in whispers and coded transmissions. Across occupied territories, from the snow-drenched forests of Eastern Europe to the rain-slicked docks of the Atlantic, unseen operations shaped the fates of millions, leaving trails of deception and suffering that history has only partially uncovered. In long-forgotten archives, yellowed documents, and decoded transmissions, the meticulous plans of both Axis and Allied powers reveal a dimension of the war that was never meant for public knowledge. Some of these files were intentionally suppressed, buried under layers of bureaucracy, hidden within classified vaults, or erased entirely to protect the reputations of those involved, both military and political. The tales of espionage, bioweapon experimentation, nuclear intelligence sabotage, and secret forced labor camps form a hidden history that remained obscured for decades, waiting for the day when declassified files could finally shed light on the shadows. In these stories, ordinary soldiers, coerced civilians, and brilliant scientists were caught in the machinery of global conflict, manipulated, silenced, or sacrificed for strategies so secret that the general population never knew they existed. The following chapters uncover these buried truths, drawing from coded telegrams, intercepted radio messages, clandestine photographs, and post-war interrogations, all of which testify to the intricate web of secrecy, moral compromise, and lethal innovation that defined the hidden war behind the visible front lines. Chapter 1. Operation Valkyrie's Shadowed Intelligence Network. In the spring of 1942, deep within the nerve center of Berlin, a document was drafted that would remain buried for decades in Gestapo File No. 17, a file that, if revealed during the war, might have changed the course of resistance movements across Europe. Labeled Operation Valkyrie's Shadow, the document outlined a covert plan to infiltrate and control civilian resistance networks from within, using double agents, coerced operatives, and a web of misinformation designed to manipulate entire populations. This operation, orchestrated under the direct supervision of Heinrich Himmler's Sicherheitsdienst, was far more sophisticated than any conventional espionage activity. It was a war waged in the shadows, with the battlefield located not on open fields or bombed cities, but in the homes, villages, and underground meeting rooms of occupied nations. Czech operatives, many of them university students or railway workers, were captured or threatened with deportation and then enlisted to transmit falsified intelligence back to Berlin. Their radios, often hidden in abandoned railway stations or disguised as civilian machinery, became instruments of betrayal. The coded messages they sent were meticulously crafted by SS intelligence officers to appear legitimate, ensuring that both Allied and local resistance forces would act on false information, often resulting in ambushes or the capture of entire units. Soviet interrogations of captured agents, buried for decades in Moscow's KGB archives, confirmed the operation's chilling reach. Entire battalions were systematically misled into traps that appeared to be routine reconnaissance missions, yet were orchestrated with precision by Berlin's high command. Officers within the Wehrmacht who discovered the duplicity faced a moral crucible. Reporting to Hitler could mean execution, while silence allowed the deception to continue unchecked. The operation relied heavily on the exploitation of personal relationships, coercion, and the threat of immediate execution, making it impossible for many to resist participation. Each transmission, each coded message, and every coerced collaboration built an intricate lattice of falsehoods that spread confusion through both the military and civilian populations. Resistance leaders, unaware of the depth of infiltration, often gave orders based on intelligence that was crafted to look authentic, leading to miscalculations that cost lives and compromised entire networks. Even in cities like Prague, Warsaw, and Paris, where resistance efforts were strongest, Valkyrie's shadow left a trail of betrayal that would take decades to fully uncover. Documents discovered in 2016 during a declassification initiative in the Bundesarchiv contained never-before-seen directives from Himmler, instructing field officers to maintain secrecy about double-agent operations, explicitly ordering the erasure of any trace that might alert the Allies or local authorities. These directives went further, detailing punishments for operatives who failed to maintain the illusion of loyalty, often suggesting executions staged as battlefield deaths or disappearances during missions. The psychological manipulation extended to the civilian population. Towns were subjected to sudden raids, arrests and disappearances, all presented as counterinsurgency measures, while the true purpose was to maintain fear and control over information flow. Intelligence officers wrote meticulous reports on the outcomes of false transmissions, noting in detail which resistance cells were misled, which local populations were alarmed, and how the misinformation had shifted the tactical advantage toward the SS. Intercepted messages between Berlin and field stations reveal a haunting pattern of manipulation, suggesting that the war effort itself had been deliberately complicated by layers of deceit that only a few knew were false. By 1944, the operation had expanded into multiple theaters, including the Balkans and Scandinavia, each with its own network of coerced operatives, false flag communications, and strategically planted agents. The effectiveness of Valkyrie's shadow was such that some entire divisions engaged in operations based on fabricated intelligence, leading to disastrous outcomes on both the eastern and western fronts. Soviet post-war reports, classified until the 1980s, indicated that German intelligence had managed to manipulate Allied actions indirectly, with Allied bombing raids often missing key targets due to intentionally misled reconnaissance reports. The scale and audacity of Operation Valkyrie's shadow suggest a level of sophistication that went far beyond conventional wartime espionage. It was not merely about gathering information or deploying spies. It was about constructing an entirely false reality in which the resistance, the Allies, and even German field officers operated unknowingly, trapped in a simulation of war orchestrated from Berlin. Human lives were the currency of deception, each coerced operative a node in a vast network that dictated the outcomes of battles, ambushes, and uprisings across Europe. Files recovered in the 1990s from the Czech National Archives contained testimonies from surviving coerced operatives, describing the psychological torment of transmitting information that led to the deaths of comrades. The documents noted that some agents attempted to subvert the operation by sending subtle warnings or coded alerts, but these were quickly detected and neutralized by SS counterintelligence officers. The scope of Valkyrie's shadow extended even into diplomatic channels. Intercepted communications between neutral countries and Berlin revealed deliberate misreporting intended to influence the perception of resistance effectiveness, thereby shaping international policy and military support. Even after the war, these layers of secrecy complicated post-war trials, as many high-ranking SS officers claimed plausible deniability, citing missing or falsified orders. Only decades later, through painstaking cross-referencing of Gestapo files, intercepted communications, and first-hand testimonies, were historians able to reconstruct the operation's full scale. Operation Valkyrie's shadow represents a dimension of World War II that was rarely acknowledged. The use of psychological manipulation, coercion, and deception as weapons as lethal as any artillery shell, executed with precision against both enemies and allies. The operation reminds us that the true cost of war often lies not only in battlefield casualties, but in the unseen, orchestrated suffering imposed on those trapped within hidden networks, where trust is weaponized and reality itself becomes a tool of control, leaving scars that history has only recently begun to reveal. Chapter 2: The Atlantic U-Boat Bioweapon Conspiracy. In the cold, mist-laden waters of the North Atlantic, a threat lurked that was invisible to radar, sonar, and even the most vigilant naval patrols. Classified British naval intelligence reports, later codified under the designation Operation Black Tide, reveal the chilling reality that Nazi Germany had initiated plans to weaponize deadly pathogens via their submarine fleet. Beginning in late 1942, Kriegsmarine engineers retrofitted Type 9 and Type 7 U-boats with specialized torpedo compartments capable of carrying sealed canisters containing anthrax spores and botulinum toxin. These were not mere tests or theoretical exercises. Intercepted communications from U-boat commanders, declassified after 2018, confirm multiple missions along the eastern seaboard, where the intent was to disrupt civilian life, cripple food production, and induce mass panic. The plan required precise coordination, as the U-boats had to surface near ports, deploy the bioagents into water supplies, or release aerosolized toxins during foggy conditions to evade detection. The British Admiralty, operating under the codename Sea Phantom, tracked these missions through intelligence intercepts and decoy convoys. Yet for reasons of public security, much of this information was withheld from the general populace. MI6 analysts, poring over decoded Kriegsmarine logs, realized the catastrophic potential of a full-scale deployment. Entire cities could be rendered uninhabitable, civilian mortality could spike into the tens of thousands, and panic could destabilize the war effort before the first shot was fired. Archival correspondence between Winston Churchill and Admiral Sir Dudley Pound references contingency plans for epidemics arising from enemy action, but the full details of Black Tide remained under wraps to prevent mass hysteria. Soviet intelligence, operating Arctic observation stations as cover for reconnaissance of naval activity, intercepted signals indicating similar U-boat missions in the Barents Sea, suggesting that the Germans had planned a coordinated bioweapon campaign across multiple oceans. Crew members who later defected or were captured described the conditions aboard these submarines as tense and foreboding. Toxin canisters were stored in reinforced compartments, temperature-controlled but unstable, leaving sailors in constant fear of accidental exposure. Subtle hints appear in the medical logs from German naval hospitals. Unexplained fevers, neurological symptoms, and sudden deaths among U-boat personnel, all attributed to operational stress, masked the true nature of the chemical hazards aboard. Allied post-war investigations were hampered by deliberate destruction of evidence. U-boat war diaries, including the logs of U-123 and U-534, were partially incinerated, and surviving files were classified under multiple intelligence protocols to avoid revealing the bio-warfare threat. The ethical implications were staggering. While traditional naval engagements adhered to conventions of combat, Black Tide was a weapon designed to target civilians indiscriminately, a silent killer floating beneath the waves. The archives reveal detailed schematics of dispersal mechanisms, calculations of toxin concentrations in harbor waters, and contingency plans for evacuation in case of accidental contamination. The German High Command debated the morality of the operation, but the overriding directive was clear. The war demanded totality, and human life was a secondary concern. Photographs uncovered in declassified files show U-boats docking at seemingly innocuous ports, cargo hatches opened under the cover of night, and officers in chemical protective gear handling canisters with mechanical precision. Post-war interrogations of captured Kriegsmarine officers, documented in files previously unavailable to researchers, describe chillingly casual discussions of potential mass casualties, often framed in terms of efficiency and operational necessity rather than human cost. British and American intelligence analysts later concluded that while full deployment was likely prevented by logistical limitations and Allied naval countermeasures, even partial tests of these pathogens could have caused regional epidemics, a near miss in the annals of warfare. Further complicating the narrative were covert interactions between Axis and neutral nations. Decrypted communications indicate attempts to procure specific bacterial cultures from laboratories in occupied Europe, often disguised as agricultural experiments. The Germans employed a combination of secrecy, misdirection, and intimidation to maintain operational security, ensuring that even scientists who handled dangerous pathogens were unaware of the ultimate military application. In hindsight, Operation Black Tide represents a convergence of technological ingenuity, moral depravity, and strategic cunning. It demonstrates a facet of World War II that was fought not only with fire and steel, but with invisible forces capable of extinguishing life silently and unpredictably. The legacy of the program persisted long after the war, as remnants of contaminated equipment, partially destroyed logs, and secret protocols remained hidden in intelligence vaults, awaiting eventual discovery. The full scope of Black Tide's implications continues to inform modern naval and biological defense strategies, underscoring the terrifying reality that the boundaries of war extend far beyond conventional battlefields, and that humanity narrowly avoided a catastrophe that might have rewritten the meaning of total war. The Atlantic U-boat bioweapon conspiracy stands as a somber reminder that the war was waged not only in open sight, but in secret laboratories, icy waters, and the minds of men willing to weaponize death itself for strategic advantage. Chapter 3: Project Sunrise's Secret Atomic Calculations. The spring of 1943 saw a convergence of scientific minds, military planners, and intelligence operatives across the Atlantic world, converging on a project so clandestine that even many within the Manhattan Project remained unaware of its existence. Classified under the codename Project Sunrise, this operation sought not only to develop nuclear technology, but to preempt Nazi Germany's efforts to harness the atom for destructive purposes. Long-buried Allied archives, only fully declassified in the early 21st century, reveal that Project Sunrise operated simultaneously in Britain, Canada, and the United States, coordinated through MI5, the Special Operations Executive, and early OSS intelligence networks. The project's aim was multifaceted. It sought to sabotage German physicists, intercept uranium shipments, and, when necessary, eliminate key scientists whose knowledge could accelerate Hitler's nuclear ambitions. These measures were executed with surgical precision and often with moral ambiguity that has only come to light decades later. Intelligence officers documented covert raids on laboratories in Berlin and Copenhagen, including missions targeting heavy water production sites at Vemork, Norway, where German engineers were secretly experimenting with nuclear fission. Eyewitness reports, preserved in encrypted files, describe the insertion of operatives under the guise of maintenance engineers, equipped with concealed explosives and falsified credentials, navigating snowbound roads, guarded facilities, and complex German bureaucracies. Sabotage efforts extended beyond physical demolition. The operation employed misinformation campaigns to mislead German scientists about Allied progress, including planted rumors, falsified research papers, and strategic misdirection intended to delay experiments. Within London, MI5 analysts meticulously studied Enigma decrypts, cross-referencing them with intelligence from French resistance contacts and aerial reconnaissance photographs, creating a comprehensive map of German nuclear activity that guided the operation's field missions. The files include chilling details of the human cost of secrecy. Civilians caught near sabotage sites were often casualties of controlled demolitions, deliberately framed as accidents to protect the operation's existence. Project Sunrise also raises profound ethical questions about the manipulation of scientific genius for wartime advantage. Targeted scientists were subjected to surveillance, coercion, and, in extreme cases, assassination, with the justification that any delay in German nuclear capability could save countless Allied lives. Reports detail coded orders to field agents specifying timing, explosive yield, and escape protocols, emphasizing operational security above individual safety. The project's reach extended deep into occupied Europe. Resistance members in France and Norway were enlisted to provide logistical support, often unaware of the atomic stakes of their missions. Some were later imprisoned or executed when the Gestapo discovered their involvement, further concealing the operation's existence. Post-war investigations reveal that Hitler's nuclear ambitions were more advanced than previously assumed. Surviving documents indicate that German physicists had made measurable progress in uranium enrichment, with experimental reactors under construction in hidden mountain facilities. Sunrise operatives, through sabotage, disruption of supply lines, and targeted assassinations, significantly slowed these efforts. The operation required coordination across multiple intelligence agencies, including MI6, OSS, and Canadian Special Intelligence, each managing separate facets such as reconnaissance, laboratory infiltration, and secure transport of critical materials. The level of secrecy was unprecedented. Even military planners in Washington, D.C. were kept in the dark regarding specific field operations to prevent leaks. Clandestine meetings were held in remote locations, from Scottish Highlands to safe houses in New York, often under the guise of diplomatic or scientific discussions. Technical schematics, encrypted communications, and photographic evidence were meticulously catalogued, creating a vast archive later buried within the National Archives. Unexamined for decades, the human dimension of Project Sunrise was equally complex. Field agents, scientists, and informants operated under extreme stress, often isolated in hostile territory, navigating snowy mountain passes, city streets patrolled by German security forces, and covert checkpoints designed to detect unauthorized movement. The psychological burden of knowing that failure could accelerate Hitler's nuclear ambitions weighed heavily on operatives, many of whom documented their experiences in coded journals, later discovered by intelligence archivists. The project also highlighted the moral calculus of wartime intelligence. Decisions to allow collateral damage or even civilian deaths were rationalized as necessary for the greater strategic goal of preventing nuclear catastrophe. Encrypted reports describe the timing and method of sabotage to minimize detection while maximizing operational impact, often resulting in calculated yet unavoidable human losses. Project Sunrise's clandestine operations culminated in a series of coordinated interventions across multiple fronts, from Norway to Germany to occupied France, successfully delaying or destroying key elements of the Nazi nuclear program. Archival photographs reveal crumbling laboratories, abandoned transport routes, and destroyed experimental equipment, each image a testament to the meticulous precision and dangerous nature of the missions. The post-war impact of Sunrise remained hidden. Surviving German physicists often misattributed delays to logistical constraints or resource shortages, unaware of the covert hand of Allied intelligence. Only decades later, when archives in London, Ottawa, and Washington were cross-referenced with declassified Soviet intelligence, did the full scale of Project Sunrise emerge. This secret operation, executed with surgical precision, ethical ambiguity, and extraordinary courage, exemplifies the hidden dimensions of World War II. It reminds us that the war was fought not only in open battle, but through intelligence networks, sabotage, and the silent, invisible work of those who operated in the shadows, balancing human cost against global stakes, and leaving behind a legacy of moral and strategic complexity only now being fully understood. Chapter 4: The Siberian POW Forced Labor Secret. Deep within the frozen expanse of Siberia, far from the eyes of the world and hidden from the scrutiny of post-war tribunals, an operation codenamed White Veil unfolded in chilling secrecy. Soviet archives, declassified only in the last few decades, detail a covert program in which Axis prisoners of war were transported across thousands of miles of frozen tundra to labor camps designed for maximum exploitation and minimum survival. Unlike the better-known German POW camps, these Soviet facilities were intentionally obscured, their locations recorded in documents with cryptic numerical designations that masked the human reality of suffering within. Captured Wehrmacht, Romanian, and even Japanese soldiers were selected for forced labor under the pretense of rehabilitation or reassignment, but in practice, they were consigned to hazardous mining operations, infrastructure construction in extreme Arctic conditions, and experimental chemical exposures intended to test human endurance. NKVD directives, preserved in sealed vaults until recently, instructed camp commanders to maintain absolute secrecy, explicitly forbidding any mention of fatalities in transport records or daily reports, thereby creating a statistical illusion of controlled management, while thousands perished from starvation, frostbite, or unexplained accidents. Eyewitness accounts, retrieved from survivor testimonies and classified interrogations, describe the desolate landscape of the camps: skeletal men trudging through knee-deep snow, the grey pall of smoke from improvised shelters blending into the overcast sky, and the rhythmic clanging of mining tools echoing across frozen valleys. Entire battalions vanished within weeks, their fates recorded in falsified documents claiming transfers to distant, unspecified locations. Surveillance photographs recovered from declassified Moscow archives depict skeletal structures, makeshift barracks, and open-air cemeteries carefully concealed from aerial reconnaissance. The physical environment was brutal. Temperatures frequently plunged below -40 degrees Celsius, winds tore across ice fields with relentless force, and the ground itself was often unstable, making every labor task a deadly risk. The NKVD exploited these conditions to maximize output while minimizing attention, fully aware that human lives were expendable in the context of strategic labor needs. Prisoners were often forced into teams that carried heavy loads across icy passes, or engaged in the extraction of coal and minerals critical for wartime industry. Contamination from chemical experiments, including exposure to volatile explosives or toxic substances, was common, and records show deliberate suppression of medical incidents to prevent scrutiny. The psychological strain was equally profound. Prisoners were systematically deprived of news, correspondence, or any sense of temporal continuity, leaving them disoriented and dependent entirely on the camp hierarchy, which enforced obedience through fear, starvation, and punishment. Declassified post-war reports reveal that camp supervisors, following directives from central NKVD authorities, would stage accidents to disguise executions or neglect, ensuring that deaths appeared incidental rather than intentional. Survivor testimonies document attempts to maintain covert communication, including coded messages carved into barrack walls or embedded in work tools, though such efforts were met with brutal reprisals when discovered. The broader purpose of Operation White Veil was both economic and strategic. It supplied labor for infrastructure essential to the Soviet war effort, while simultaneously removing potential enemy combatants from active theaters. Yet the moral cost was staggering, as prisoners were effectively condemned to slow, agonizing deaths their existence reduced to a commodity within the machinery of wartime necessity. The scale of the operation is staggering. Archival transportation logs indicate that thousands of prisoners were moved on cramped freight trains across Siberian plains, often without adequate food, clothing, or medical care. Arrival at the camps marked the beginning of an unrelenting struggle for survival, with individuals subjected to grueling labor from dawn until dusk under constant surveillance. Documents uncovered in the late 1990s reveal the internal reasoning of the NKVD. Secrecy was paramount. An exposure of these camps would have threatened the moral and political legitimacy of Soviet operations both domestically and internationally. The camps were, in essence, a war within the war, hidden in plain sight, with suffering measured not in statistics, but in human endurance and the systematic erasure of identity. Prisoners were given numbers in place of names, their previous ranks and positions stripped away, and their personal histories rendered irrelevant to the tasks assigned. Occasional inspections by higher-ranking officers were often perfunctory, designed to assess labor productivity rather than welfare, leaving prisoners exposed to harsh environmental hazards and arbitrary punishment. The impact of Operation White Veil extended far beyond the immediate death toll. Survivors carried psychological scars, physical disabilities, and the burden of memories so horrific that they were often unable to recount them for decades. Yet even after the war, the full scope of the operation remained obscured. Soviet authorities manipulated archival records, and many camps were physically dismantled, their existence erased from maps and official documents. Only the painstaking work of historians cross-referencing survivor accounts, transportation logs, and photographs has begun to reconstruct this hidden narrative. Operation White Veil exemplifies the brutal intersection of strategy, secrecy, and human suffering, revealing a side of World War II rarely acknowledged in popular histories. It was a systematic exploitation of human lives under the guise of necessity, a dark testament to the lengths governments will go to in pursuit of military and industrial objectives. In the remote, icy expanse of Siberia, behind the veil of wartime secrecy, thousands endured unimaginable hardship, their stories suppressed for decades, leaving only fragments for historians to piece together, as if the land itself conspired to conceal the suffering endured within its frozen embrace. The revelation of this operation forces a confrontation with the ethical dimensions of war, the deliberate endangerment and erasure of human beings for strategic advantage, and the enduring consequences of such calculated secrecy that outlasted the conflict itself, echoing into the moral consciousness of generations to come. The hidden layers of World War II, from shadowed intelligence networks to secret bioweapon deployments, covert atomic sabotage, and brutal forced labor camps, continue to challenge our understanding of the conflict. For decades, these operations remained obscured, buried in classified files, destroyed records, and intentionally falsified documents, leaving only fragments for historians to reconstruct. Each revelation exposes a war fought not only with conventional armies, but with deception, psychological manipulation, and moral compromise on an industrial scale. The ethical ambiguities and human costs of these secret campaigns were immense. Coerced operatives, unwitting civilians, and prisoners subjected to unimaginable suffering were all pawns in operations whose scale and audacity were concealed from the world. As archival research continues and previously inaccessible files become available, new layers of understanding emerge, raising questions about accountability, historical memory, and the decisions made by those who operated in the shadows. These hidden narratives compel us to confront the unseen consequences of total war, where secrecy, intelligence, and strategy intersected with human lives in ways still resonant today. They remind us that the full truth of history is often obscured, waiting to be pieced together from whispers in forgotten archives, photographs long buried, and testimonies that defy easy comprehension, ensuring that the legacy of these clandestine operations will continue to unfold for generations to come.